Welcome to Stories Junction. Let's begin today's story. Mira kissed another man, believing it was her ticket to something brighter, something alive. She thought she was stepping into joy, but her husband didn't shout, didn't fight. He just turned and walked away. Months later, her world collapsed under the weight of her choices, and by the time she saw the true cost, he was gone. Not just gone, but thriving in a way she couldn't have imagined. This is how it began. James Carver was a man of order. His days started at 5:30 a.m., the alarm cutting through the pre-dawn quiet of their small home in Asheville, North Carolina. Black coffee, no sugar, poured into the same chipped mug. A quick jog around the block, then into his work boots and out the door by 6:15. His job as a home inspector wasn't flashy, checking foundations, roofs, and plumbing for buyers and builders, but it was steady, honest work. It grounded him, gave him purpose. That Wednesday morning felt like any other. He was scheduled to inspect a fixer-upper in a quiet neighborhood near the French Broad River, where old bungalows lined streets shaded by ancient oaks. The client, a property developer, was waiting when James pulled up in his pickup. Routine. Nothing hinted that by noon, his life would fracture. James worked methodically, clipboard in hand, flashlight scanning crawl spaces and attic beams. The house was solid, nothing unexpected. He was nearly done when he realized he'd left his moisture meter in the truck. Stepping outside into the crisp morning air, he froze. Across the street, a woman walked up a gravel path toward a craftsman-style house. Blonde hair pulled into a loose ponytail, wearing the denim jacket he'd bought her for their 3rd anniversary. It was Mira, his wife. His first thought was innocent. Maybe she was visiting a co-worker, dropping off a package. But then the door opened, and a man appeared. Lean, confident, with a grin that carried too much ease. Mira stepped into his arms, and their kiss was slow, deliberate, familiar. James stood rooted, his breath shallow. The world tilted, but he didn't yell or charge across the street. His hands tightened into fists, knuckles white, but his face stayed calm, unreadable. He crossed the street with deliberate steps, boots crunching on the gravel. He knocked on the door, firm but controlled. The man, his name, James would later learn, was Owen, answered, his smile faltering into confusion. He didn't know James, not yet. James's voice was low, steady, like a blade. "Get her out here, now, or I come in." Owen blinked, color draining from his face. Seconds later, Mira appeared in the doorway, her eyes wide, her lips parting in a gasp. "James, oh God, no," she stammered, her voice trembling. He cut her off, his words ice cold. "You chose this. You live with it." She reached for him, her hand shaking, but he stepped back. "Don't," he said, his voice a wall. Then he turned, walked back to his truck, and drove home. No scene, no shouting, just a quiet severance. Their house felt different when he stepped inside. The air carried her scent, lavender and vanilla. Her scarf was draped over the couch, her half-read novel on the coffee table, a bookmark tucked inside. James didn't pause to mourn. He began packing, not his things, but hers. Every dress, every earring, every photo from their 5 years together. He worked with precision, folding her clothes, stacking her books, sealing each box with tape. There was no anger, only purpose. He was dismantling a life that no longer belonged to him. By late afternoon, he loaded the boxes into his truck and drove back to Owen's house. The sun was low, painting the street in gold. One by one, he placed Mira's belongings on the sidewalk, each box a quiet declaration. Neighbors watched from behind curtains, their whispers soft but growing. Mira didn't come out. Owen didn't either. When the last box was set down, James stood for a moment, staring at the pile. Then he got in his truck and drove away, the engine's rumble the only sound breaking the silence. That night, his house felt empty but not heavy. For the first time in years, the quiet was his own. He poured a glass of water, sat at the kitchen table, and let the stillness settle. Meanwhile, Mira sat on Owen's couch, her hands clasped tightly, her heart hammering. That kiss was supposed to feel like freedom, like a spark she'd been chasing. She thought she was choosing excitement, a life unchained from routine. But James's eyes, calm, disappointed, final, cut deeper than any anger could. Owen tried to lighten the mood, tossing out a laugh. Well, that could have gone worse, right? Mira didn't respond. She stared at the floor, her stomach twisting. She hadn't just betrayed a marriage. She'd broken a man who loved her without fanfare, without needing to prove it to anyone. And now, the world felt colder, sharper, like a blade she'd forged herself. James Carver didn't rush to erase Mira from his life. He dismantled her presence with the same precision he brought to his work inspecting homes. The house in Asheville still held traces of her. A bottle of her lavender shampoo in the bathroom, a pair of her sneakers by the back door, the faint echo of her humming in the mornings. But James was resolute. He wasn't erasing her out of spite. He was reclaiming himself. The day after he left her belongings on Owen's sidewalk, he began the slow, deliberate process of purging their shared past. He took down the framed photo from their hiking trip in the Blue Ridge Mountains, the one where Mira's smile was brighter than the sun filtering through the pines. He didn't linger over it, didn't trace her face with his fingers. He placed it in a box, sealed it, and moved on. Anniversary cards, her favorite mug with the chipped handle, the playlist they'd made for road trips. He removed them all, not with anger, but with a quiet finality. By the end of the week, the house felt less like a museum of their marriage and more like a space he could breathe in. At his lawyer's office, James sat across from a desk cluttered with papers and a half-empty coffee cup. The lawyer, a gray-haired woman with sharp eyes, asked why he was filing for divorce so suddenly. James leaned back in his chair, his work boots leaving faint dust marks on the floor. Betrayal, he said simply. She made her choice. He didn't elaborate, didn't need to. The lawyer nodded, jotting notes. No alimony, no contact, James added. Clean break. He wasn't seeking revenge, not yet. He wanted distance, a life untainted by the ache of what was. When he left the office, the autumn air was crisp, the streets of Asheville alive with tourists browsing art galleries and coffee shops. For a moment, he felt lighter, like a man stepping out of shadow. Meanwhile, Mira was unraveling. Owen's apartment, tucked above a brewery in West Asheville, was supposed to be her new beginning, a place where passion would outweigh the guilt. But the reality was far less romantic. The space was cramped, with exposed brick walls that felt cold, not charming. Owen's idea of dinner was reheated pizza or takeout burritos, and his clothes littered the floor like a teenager's. The thrill of their affair, once electric in stolen moments, dulled under the weight of daily life. Owen wasn't the man she'd built up in her mind. He was careless, quick to snap when she was quiet too long. "You're moping again," he said one evening, tossing a beer cap onto the counter. "What? You think he's going to call you? You're the one who stepped out." His words landed like a punch. Mira tried to brush it off, forcing a smile, but it cracked at the edges. She had been checking her phone, hoping for a text, an email, anything from James. A chance to explain, to beg, to know he still felt something. But James gave her nothing. His silence was a wall she couldn't climb. At the community center where Mira taught yoga, the whispers had started. Colleagues she once laughed with now offered tight smiles or avoided her gaze. A co-worker, a wiry woman named Claire, pulled her aside one day. "People are talking," Claire said, not unkindly, "about you and, Mira's stomach twisted. She nodded, mumbled a thank you, and hurried to the bathroom to splash water on her face. The rumors were spreading, quiet but relentless, like ripples in a still pond. Her friends were pulling away too. Her best friend, Lena, hadn't texted in days. Her brother, usually quick with a sarcastic quip, left her calls unanswered. Mira felt the world shrinking around her, her choices boxing her in. Nights were the worst. She lay awake on Owen's lumpy couch. He'd insisted she take it while he slept in the bedroom, claiming he needed space. In the dark, her mind replayed that moment on his porch, James's eyes cold and unyielding. She started having dreams, vivid, cruel ones where James stood at their old front door, telling her to leave, his voice calm but final. She'd wake gasping, her pillow damp with sweat. One night, she couldn't take it anymore. She opened her laptop and typed a message to James, her fingers trembling. "Can we talk? Just once. I need to explain." She stared at the screen for an hour, her thumb hovering over send. Finally, she pressed it, her heart pounding. The message sat in her outbox, a fragile hope. James saw it the next morning, his phone buzzing as he sipped coffee. He read it, his jaw tight, then closed the app. He didn't reply. Instead, he booked a solo trip to a cabin in the Smoky Mountains. No Wi-Fi, just the sound of wind through the trees. The idea of being untethered felt like a lifeline. Back in Asheville, James began reshaping his life. He repainted the living room a soft gray, replaced the old quilt on the bed with crisp new sheets, and started cooking for himself. Simple meals, grilled chicken, roasted vegetables. He found comfort in the rhythm of it, the way a knife moved through a carrot, the sizzle of oil in a pan. He joined a gym, not to reinvent himself, but to feel strong again. He rediscovered albums he hadn't listened to in years, Springsteen, Tom Waits, letting the music fill the house. Slowly, he was rebuilding not just his space, but his sense of self. The grief was there, a quiet current, but he refused to let it pull him under. Mira, meanwhile, was sinking. One evening, Owen came home to find her staring at a broken glass on the kitchen floor. She dropped it, and the shards mirrored her fractured thoughts. "I'm such a mess," she whispered, tears spilling over. Owen sighed, his patience thinning. "I didn't sign up for this, Mira," he said, his voice flat. "You wanted this. You came to me." Her anger flared, sharp and sudden. "You pursued me. You made me think." She stopped, her voice breaking. Owen shrugged, unapologetic. "You made your own choices." It was the first time she saw him clearly, not as the escape she'd craved, but as a reflection of her own recklessness. That night, she slept on the couch again, the glass still scattered on the floor. By morning, Owen was gone. No note, no explanation, just an empty apartment. Mira sat alone, the weight of her decisions pressing down like a storm cloud. James was out there, moving forward, while she was left with nothing but the echo of her own mistakes. What would happen when the silence broke? And what was James planning, if anything at all? Myra's world was shrinking, the walls of her choices closing in. She moved out of Owen's apartment the day after he left, his absence a final confirmation that the life she'd chased was a mirage. With nowhere else to go, she landed at her cousin Tessa's place, a small condo on the edge of Asheville with creaky floors and a view of the highway. It wasn't home. It smelled of instant coffee and Tessa's cat. But it was a roof, a temporary anchor for someone who'd burned her own harbor. Myra's days blurred into a cycle of long shifts at the community center, where she taught yoga with a forced smile and longer nights staring at Tessa's mismatched curtains, replaying every misstep that led her here. The thrill of sneaking around with Owen, once a pulse of adrenaline, now felt like a fever dream gone sour. She was alone, not just physically, but in a deeper, bone-aching way. At the community center, the whispers had grown louder. A coworker caught her in the break room, her voice low but pointed. "Mira, people know about you and that guy. It's all over the staff chat." Myra's face burned, her throat tight. She nodded, unable to speak, and retreated to the supply closet, pretending to organize mats. Her phone, once a lifeline to friends and family, was quiet now. Her brother sent one-word replies. Lena, her closest friend, had stopped calling altogether. Even at the grocery store, Mira felt eyes on her. Real or imagined, it didn't matter. The weight was the same. She started avoiding mirrors, not because of vanity, but because the woman staring back was a stranger, hollowed out by guilt. One night, she pulled out her laptop and scrolled through old messages from James. Simple texts: "Don't skip lunch today. Drive safe. Rain's bad." She'd barely noticed them when they were sent, skimming them in her rush to feel alive elsewhere. Now, they were lifelines she couldn't touch. She typed another email to him, her fingers hesitant. "I'm sorry, James. I didn't know what I was throwing away. Can we just talk?" She sent it, knowing he wouldn't reply. His silence was a language she was learning to read, and it spoke of finality. James, meanwhile, was carving out a life that didn't bend under the weight of betrayal. His days as a home inspector took on new meaning. He found satisfaction in the small fixes, tightening a loose pipe, spotting a hidden leak before it ruined a home. It was control, something he could hold on to. He'd always been steady, but now he was deliberate, moving through life with a quiet purpose. He started running again, not to escape, but to feel his own strength. The trails around Asheville, winding through forests thick with pine and cedar, became his refuge. He'd run until his lungs burned, the rhythm of his steps drowning out the faint echoes of Mira's laugh. At home, he kept reshaping his space. He replaced the old dining table with a sleek one from a local carpenter, hung new curtains, and planted herbs in the backyard. Basil, rosemary thyme, small acts of growth that felt like defiance. One afternoon, while inspecting a century-old farmhouse outside town, James met an elderly client named Ruth. Her home needed rewiring, and she watched him work with a keen eye. When he finished, she offered him iced tea on her porch. "You've got a steady way about you," she said, her voice warm but knowing, like someone who's rebuilt after a storm. James smiled, sipping the tea. Something like that. That night, he drove home under a sky streaked with pink, Ruth's words lingering. He wasn't just surviving. He was building something new, piece by piece. The grief was still there, a shadow that followed him, but it no longer defined his steps. Mira's life, in contrast, was a series of stumbles. Tessa tried to help, leaving self-help books on the coffee table or suggesting therapy. But Mira brushed it off. What could she say to a stranger that she hadn't already admitted to herself? That she'd traded a good man for a fleeting rush? That she'd mistaken attention for love? She started taking extra yoga classes, hoping the rhythm of breath and movement would quiet her mind, but the silence only amplified her regrets. One evening, she overheard a group of students whispering about her. "She's the one who cheated," one said, not bothering to lower her voice. Mira froze, her hands trembling as she rolled up her mat. She didn't confront them. She didn't have the strength. Instead, she walked to her car and cried, the kind of sobs that left her gasping, her hands gripping the steering wheel. Then came the rumors about James. A friend from the community center, unaware of Mira's pain, mentioned seeing him at a downtown cafe with a woman. "She seemed nice," the friend said casually. They were laughing, looked happy. Mira's heart sank, her fingers tightening around her water bottle. She managed a nod, a weak, "That's good," before excusing herself. That night, she sat on Tessa's couch, scrolling through social media, searching for traces of James. She found nothing. He'd always been private, never one for posts or updates. But the absence of evidence didn't ease her mind. She imagined him smiling, moving on, while she was stuck, drowning in the wreckage of her choices. James wasn't seeking happiness despite Mira. He was simply living. At a local brewery one evening, he met Elise, a carpenter with calloused hands and a quick laugh. She wasn't flashy, not like Mira with her vibrant energy, but she was grounded, her eyes steady when they talked. They swapped stories over pints of amber ale, hers about crafting furniture, his about the quirks of old houses. When she teased him about his meticulous checklist, he laughed, a real laugh, one that felt like a door opening. They exchanged numbers, no pressure, just possibility. James didn't rush. He didn't need to. For the first time in months, he felt the stir of something new. Not love, not yet, but hope. Mira, alone in Tessa's condo, started sleeping with a lamp on. It wasn't fear of the dark. It was the emptiness that came with it. The silence was louder now, heavy with the weight of what she'd lost. She dreamed of James again, standing in their old kitchen, his voice calm but cutting. "You chose this." She woke with a start, her heart racing. The next day, she saw a utility truck with a logo that reminded her of James's company. It was a different name, a different truck, but it was enough to unravel her. She pulled over, her hands shaking, and let the tears come. Mira's days bled into one another, each one heavier than the last. Living in her cousin Tessa's condo in Asheville felt like borrowing someone else's life. The hum of the highway outside was a constant reminder that the world was moving while she was stuck, tethered to her regrets. Her shifts at the community center, once a source of purpose, now felt like a performance. She guided yoga classes with a hollow voice, her cues automatic, her smile a mask. The whispers about her affair had solidified into a quiet judgment. Students avoided her classes, and coworkers spoke in hushed tones when she passed. Mira felt like a ghost, haunting a life she'd once owned. She stopped checking her phone for James's reply. Weeks had passed since her last email, and his silence was a verdict. She'd betrayed a man who'd loved her steadily, and now she was paying the price, not in loud confrontations, but in the slow erosion of her world. One evening, Tessa found Mira curled on the couch, still in her yoga clothes from the morning. A cold cup of tea sat untouched on the coffee table. "You can't keep doing this," Tessa said softly, sitting beside her. "You need to talk to someone, Mira. A therapist, a friend, anyone." Mira shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "What's there to say? I ruined everything." Tessa didn't push, but left a therapist card on the counter the next morning. Mira stared at it for days, never calling. Instead, she threw herself into distractions, extra shifts, cleaning Tessa's condo, even volunteering to repaint the community center studio. But nothing silenced the guilt. She started avoiding places she and James used to go: the Riverside Cafe, the bookstore downtown, the trailhead where they'd hiked on weekends. Asheville, once a city of comfort, now felt like a map of her mistakes. Then came the moment that broke her open. At the community center, a new instructor, a bright-eyed woman named Sarah, mentioned James in passing. "Saw your ex at the farmer's market," Sarah said, oblivious to Myra's flinch. "He was with someone. They looked happy, like really happy." Myra's breath caught, her hands trembling as she adjusted a stack of yoga blocks. She mumbled something vague and fled to the bathroom, where she leaned against the sink, her reflection pale and unfamiliar. That night, she sat on Tessa's balcony, the autumn air sharp against her skin, and wrote a letter to James. Not an email this time, something tangible, inked in her shaky handwriting. "James, I know you don't want to hear from me, and I don't deserve your time. But I need you to know I see it now. I broke us, not because you weren't enough, but because I was chasing something I didn't understand. You were my home, and I burned it down. I'm sorry." She sealed it in an envelope, but didn't send it. It felt too small, too late. Instead, she tucked it into a drawer, a confession she wasn't ready to release. James, meanwhile, was living with a quiet strength. His work as a home inspector had become a kind of meditation. Each house a puzzle he could solve, each fix a step toward stability. He'd always been good at his job, but now he took pride in the details, catching flaws others missed. Clients noticed. A contractor left a note with his payment. "You're the best we've worked with. Thanks for caring." James kept the note, not out of ego, but as a reminder that he was more than his past. He ran longer trails now, his legs carrying him deeper into the Smoky Mountains, where the air was clean and the world felt vast. At home, his space was his own. New books on the shelves, a guitar he was teaching himself to play, a kitchen that smelled of fresh herbs. The traces of Mira were gone, not erased in anger, but released with intention. He'd been seeing Elise, the carpenter he met at the brewery, more often. She wasn't a replacement for Mira. She was different, steady, in a way that felt like solid ground. They spent evenings at small music venues, her laughter cutting through the strum of banjos and fiddles. One night, over tacos at a food truck, Elise asked about his past. "You ever miss her?" she said, her tone gentle, not probing. James looked at the city lights across the river, his voice even. "Sometimes, but not the way you'd think. It's like remembering a house you lived in, but you don't want the keys back." Elise nodded, her hand brushing his. Good answer. Her honesty, her lack of pretense, was a balm. James didn't feel the need to perform with her, and that was new, freeing. Myra's attempts to move forward faltered. She tried dating. A barista who talked too much, a hiker who seemed kind but distant. Each date ended the same way. Mira comparing them to James, to his quiet humor, his steady hands. One man, a teacher, noticed her distraction. "You're somewhere else," he said over coffee. Mira forced a smile but didn't deny it. She was somewhere else, back in the life she'd thrown away, where James cooked her breakfast on Sundays and left notes in her lunch bag. The weight of that loss was crushing. She stopped dating, stopped pretending she could replace what she'd had. Owen, the man she'd risked everything for, had vanished completely. She heard through a mutual friend he'd moved to Raleigh, chasing a new job, a new life. He hadn't even texted her goodbye. The realization stung. She'd been a chapter he'd closed without a second thought. One afternoon, Mira saw James by chance. She was walking to her car after a shift when she spotted him leaving a hardware store, a bag of tools in hand. He was with Elise, her hand resting lightly on his arm as they laughed about something Mira couldn't hear. She froze, her heart pounding. James looked different, not louder or flashier, but lighter, like a man who'd shed a heavy coat. Their eyes didn't meet. He didn't see her. But in that moment, Mira saw something that cut deeper than any words: peace. James had found it, and she was still lost in the storm she'd created. Winter softened into spring in Asheville, the city blooming with dogwoods and azaleas, the air warm with promise. Mira had moved out of Tessa's condo, finding a small studio apartment near the community center. It was sparse: a bed, a second-hand table, a single shelf for books, but it was hers. She planted mint and lavender in pots on the windowsill, lit sage candles at dusk, and played soft folk music to fill the quiet. She wasn't healing, not yet, but she was learning to exist in the aftermath of her choices. Her yoga classes were smaller now, but she taught with a new sincerity, her voice steadier, her presence more grounded. She'd stopped chasing distractions. No more dates, no more frantic attempts to outrun guilt. Instead, she journaled, long entries about her mistakes, her regrets, and the faint hope of rebuilding herself. She called her brother more, mending the distance her actions had created. She even visited her parents, spending a weekend in their mountain cabin, their quiet acceptance a balm she hadn't expected. Mira had stopped searching for James online, stopped replaying their last moments. The letter she'd written months ago remained unsent, tucked in a drawer with her old wedding ring. One evening, she took the ring to the French Broad River, its waters glinting under the setting sun. She held it in her palm, its weight both familiar and foreign, then let it fall into the current. It wasn't a grand gesture, just a quiet release, a step toward letting go. She knew now that her deepest loss wasn't James's love, but her own self-respect. To love someone well, she realized, you must first know your own worth, and she'd chase validation before she'd learn to stand alone. The work of reclaiming herself was slow, painful, but she was beginning, one small choice at a time. James, meanwhile, had built a life that radiated quiet strength. His home was no longer a shadow of his past, but a reflection of his present. Wooden furniture he'd sanded himself, walls painted in warm tones, a porch where he sipped coffee at dawn. His work as a home inspector thrived. Clients trusted his thoroughness, his calm expertise. He ran trails with Elise now, their steps in sync as they navigated the Smoky Mountains' winding paths. Elise had moved in that spring, her presence like sunlight in a once dark room. She didn't erase Mira's memory. She added warmth, her tools scattered in the garage, her laughter filling the kitchen as they cooked. One Sunday, they burned a batch of pancakes, smoke curling from the pan, and James laughed until his eyes watered, a sound he hadn't heard from himself in years. Elise grinned, tossing a charred pancake at him. "We're hopeless," she said, and he caught her hand, pulling her close. He was home, not just in his house, but in himself. One evening, James and Elise sat on a rooftop bar, the city's lights twinkling below. She asked about Mira, her voice soft but direct. "Do you ever wonder how she's doing?" James sipped his bourbon, considering. "Not anymore," he said. "I hope she's okay, but that's her story now." Elise nodded, her hand resting on his. Her honesty, her ability to ask without judgment, was a gift. James didn't dwell on the past, not out of bitterness, but because he'd chosen to live forward. His divorce had been finalized months ago, a clean break, no lingering ties. When his lawyer asked if he had any message for Mira, James had shaken his head. I said everything when I walked away. He meant it. Closure wasn't about words. It was about deciding to stop carrying someone else's weight. Mira's life wasn't one of triumph, but of quiet persistence. She passed the house she'd shared with James one afternoon, its new owners having added a swing to the porch, the door now a deep green. She paused, her heart steady, and smiled faintly. Not with pain, but with respect for what had been. She understood now that her punishment wasn't James's silence or his happiness. It was the mirror her choices held up, showing her who she'd been. She was learning to forgive that woman, not for absolution, but to move forward. At the community center, a student approached her after class, a shy woman who thanked her for the session. "You seem like you've been through something," the woman said. "It makes you real." Mira nodded, her throat tight. For the first time, she felt seen, not as a scandal, but as someone trying. One night, Mira left a voicemail for James. She didn't plan it. The words spilled out as she sat on her balcony, the stars bright above. "James, it's me. I don't expect you to call back, and I don't need you to. I just wanted you to know I'm sorry. Not for what I lost, but for what I took from you. You didn't deserve it. You were more than I knew how to hold. I'm trying to be better, for me, not for you. I hope you're happy. You deserve that." Her voice cracked, but she didn't cry. She hung up, feeling lighter, not because she expected a reply, but because she'd spoken her truth. James listened to the voicemail the next morning, his coffee cooling on the counter. He stood by the window, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold. Mira's words were raw, unguarded, but they didn't pull him back. He felt no anger, no ache, just a quiet acknowledgement. He deleted the message, not with cruelty, but with peace. He was done collecting echoes. That evening, he and Elise drove to a bluegrass festival, her head resting on his shoulder as they swayed to the music. He breathed her in, sawdust and citrus, and fell whole. He didn't need to prove his happiness. He lived it, steady and unassuming. Mira walked to work the next day, the spring air soft against her skin. She didn't wait for James's response, didn't check her phone. She bought a coffee, smiled at the barista, and stepped into her day. Her life was small, imperfect, but it was hers to build. James, across town, finished a job, his hands steady as he signed off on a home's inspection. He drove home under a sky streaked with pink, the radio playing a song he loved. Their stories, once entwined, now ran parallel, each a testament to the cost of choices and the power of choosing again. Mira was learning to stand. James was already walking, and in their separate silences, they found not revenge, but reckoning, the kind that comes when you let go and live well.